I'm Claire Pont. I'm the Environment and Sustainability Manager for Spark New Zealand. I've been working in the sustainability space for upwards of 15 years. And so from a climate reporting perspective, been working in the greenhouse gas reporting area for quite a while, let's say 9 years. As far as like climate reporting and the climate related disclosures, probably for the last 3 years that have had input into that. And obviously because they are fairly new and a fairly new requirement, but mostly leading that greenhouse gas inventory part of those disclosures as well. So it's all very much combined, but that's my role.
And so Spark is a mandatory reporting entity for the New Zealand climate-related disclosures. And so was Spark doing voluntary reporting prior to becoming a mandatory reporter? Yeah. Okay. Great. So I've got some questions. Firstly, if you could perhaps walk us through your audit timeline. So like, when did you start preparing? And what surprised you most about the whole process and how long it took or didn't take?
Yeah, so I was reflecting on this question and it's kind of interesting because I think for us, there's sort of like not a start and end point with the auditing. So it's less of that, less of a timeline, it's more of a cycle. So like we're almost constantly preparing for audit through our quarterly reporting cycles. And so in practice for us, this means like we're compiling, calculating and analysing data every 3 months. So we're requesting this from the data owners and we're working with suppliers very regularly. And this allows us to identify potential audit issues as early as possible. You know, it allows us to sense check information throughout the year. But I do confess that, you know, even with this preparation, so even with this cycle where you feel like you're constantly working towards it, the end of year audit and reporting period is still a time crunch. And so every year we're sort of reviewing that scheduling. And it seems to be that we're starting earlier every year. And when I say that audit process, that engagement with the auditors and bringing them in and starting that process. And so to help ease that pressure, but we've actually looked to do an interim to date audit, which we sort of cover off the financial year. So our financial year is July to June. So we do the July to May period and we'll audit that in June. And then we'll do a wash up period for that remaining month following the end of the financial year. I'd like to say that has some of that pressure. I think we will get there slowly. I think just like as we sort of look to make ongoing improvements, you know, like things just take a bit longer sometimes. And yet there's more questions from auditors as we bring in new information and new sets of data. So it's a work in progress. And I was thinking about like the most time consuming and surprising area for us. I think this past year that's just gone was that spend-based data for us. It was a lot more time consuming and probably difficult to deal with than we anticipated. And this is largely due to the financial systems and processes that we have in place within Spark. And because we have the parent company, but we also have subsidiaries who have sort of legacy systems in place. And they are being transitioned, but you're dealing with multiple financial systems for this one category. So it's tricky. It's tricky and it's also just very time consuming. I mean, I'm not a financial expert, and so having to learn these different systems and work through them quite difficult. And for the auditors as well, they had a lot of questions around the different systems too.
I can imagine.
Yeah, and so like we did try our best to have a really close relationship with the different financial teams, but probably will more so this year coming into the next audit period, because it's just so critical that one, that they're aligned with what we're doing, so they kind of understand what we're looking for, but two, that they're able to sort of communicate to the auditors where our knowledge, you know, sustainability practitioner, where our knowledge doesn't exist. So,
exactly.
So I think that for me, like I'm not sure if that's what you're sort of looking for, but that set of data was just like a beast to deal with, particularly for the first time. And so there will be, you know, ongoing refinement, working with you guys as well, you know, like trying to work out systems that we can put in place to make it less manual and tedious. But
Yes, I know. And I think as you, again, start moving towards diving into that spend and starting to be more accurately, that's
absolutely.
While your reporting will get better, it doesn't necessarily get easier in some ways because you're then dealing with a new chunk. So it's a journey of continuous improvement, isn't it?
100%. And then having multiple types of data is difficult. Like we have other sets and other categories that do that. But with spend, I just have this feeling that there'll be, let's say we'll have a supplier who provides us with multiple different types of services and products. For some things, it's going to be quite straightforward to get that product level data, and then some parts of what they provide won't. And being able to sort of separate that out
Will be tricky.
It's going to be tricky. It's going to be tricky. Yeah.
Yes, the work is cut out for us.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you could go back to the start of your audit preparation, what's one thing you would do differently?
So I inherited the greenhouse gas inventory when I joined Spark. A lot of it was very Excel based. It was quite chaotic. And so if I was to go right back to the beginning, I would set up more structured documentation from day one. So having those processes better articulated and documented and organized early, I think even to date, it would have saved us a lot of time during testing and review. And it'll also make communication with auditors a lot easier and clearer. It comes from things that are historical, but also as we introduce like new methodologies and refine things, oftentimes you get swept up in, getting that done and making sure that works and is robust, and forget that we need to be documenting that and making sure that it's like very clear. And so that is probably, if I could go back to the beginning, I would do that from the get-go rather than sort of try to, just push it through and having to catch up at the end. Yeah.
It is one of those things that like it isn't required to have immediately. So people often just go, oh, I'm so busy, I've got so many other priorities. But actually then it comes back to bite you, because then you're like, oh, where did we get that piece of data from? Who was responsible for that?
Yeah.
How did we calculate that? And so documenting is a really big one that you will be grateful that you did, even if it takes you a bit of extra time.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're right, like even like some of those like little things that you like a factor that you're multiplying by because it equals this is the amount, as an example, a rack consumes. And then I go back and go like, so why did we use it? Why did we use this? And no one, and there was so there's a lot, sometimes like it takes a lot of rework as well, because I'm having to sort of like work backwards to be like, hey, why did we have this number there? And
and the auditors will come in and they'll pick something.
Oh, 100%.
You have no idea what they're going to pick, and then you're like, oh.
Yeah, of course you're picking that.
Yeah, I did that one and that one so well, and now you've picked something.
Yeah, no, that's 100%. 100%. If I'm reflecting on our scope 1 and 2 are really quite strong. It's that scope 3 that like it seems to be ever evolving and that we're sort of chasing our tail with. That I think we need to really lock in that documentation. I think the problem was that we were improving on it year on year, and we're so stuck in that improving mode that we didn't even think we did, but we just lost time.
Not enough detail as well.
Yeah.
Or you jot down some notes that make sense to you at the time, and then you come back to it 6 months later and you're like, I don't even know what that means.
Yeah. And you're like, oh, I'm sure I got it from there. And you're like, oh. No, but I think we're on the up with it, but it's just, if I could go back, definitely would have done it from scratch. Day one.
So start off with strong documentation.
100%.
Won't regret it.
Yeah.
Okay. Data gaps and data quality issues that came up during the audit. How did you handle those? Do you have examples?
I think there's always things that arise during audit as far as data quality or gaps. And sometimes they can be significant, and other times they're just like little quirks that maybe you missed a certain thing. And the approach that I take, or we take as a team, understanding that root cause. So going back to the beginning and kind of going back to that process and making sure we executed it right. There is that sort of lens of like assessing the materiality and impact. And the reason I sort of speak to this is that you don't want to be putting heaps of time in during that audit period if it isn't a material issue, because there is so much other stuff that needs to be attended to. So there's sort of that review as well. And then aligning on a transparent remediation approach, right? Like, so if we do find an issue, making sure that we're communicating that with auditors, making sure that that is documented well within the report, and looking at how we can fix it going forward.
Yeah.
I was sort of reflecting on the examples. There's been like a few, and then some of them are just like little quirky things. But one that really came to mind as far as like the systems that we had in place and the importance of making sure that we have documentation, that our stakeholders are really involved. We had some months, it wasn't even really months, I think it was a few days missing within one of our spend extracts. And the extract came from sort of a manually compiled and managed Power BI. The people that had managed it and created it had left the business. So there was none of that, I guess, legacy or succession planning with that. And at the time, it was a really good solution because it was our first time doing spend. And it was sort of going, this is the single source of truth. But I guess as sustainability practitioners, we probably didn't have that insight into actually how it was created, what was being built into it, things like that.
Yeah.
So when that popped up, required us to go back to some of those teams, and a lot of them didn't even know that this BI existed for one, but going back and seeing if we could look at the root source of the issue. And what we did, we sort of went through the process again through, we extracted the data, we reviewed in detail. And through this, we recognized that there was a filter configuration issue. So it was to do with some of the filtering that had happened in the extraction of the report. And so once we identified that, it was pretty, straightforward. We were able to quantify that to see how material it was. We resolved it. We did another extract. But I think probably more critical was that we could build in those additional review checks. And there's sometimes because there's a lot of trust with those data owners or the people providing us with the reports, making sure that we also do some additional reviews. So even though it was mine, I was like a date, like a number that wasn't filtering through. Even though it's like relatively minor, it's quite easily missed. And so it's us doing those like really more robust checking of like the process versus the extract, essentially, if I'm making any sense. We sort of follow that process as well. We're really transparent with the auditors. It was communicated within our audit report, and we've just made sure that we're applying the right filters or checking for the filters, I should say, in the future. So it's sort of like, that's how we deal with it.
It's easy to slip into that sort of autopilot role when you've got a lot of different things going on and you're doing that and you're like, I just have to do this, and this, and then ping, it's gone. But so trying to remember to have a bit more of a critical mindset when you're going into it and actually being thoughtful about what you're doing can save you a bit more time on the other end. But then we're just human as well. It's going to happen.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that I've learned from our recent carbon audit, much smaller company, obviously, but is that sometimes the auditor will pick something and then you'll be drilling down into that thing to get to the root source or error, correct the error. And they'll sometimes just keep going. Whereas, like you said, the materiality is really important. You can say to them, this is only 0.03% of our Scope 3. We understand that this has been an error. We'll make sure we don't do that. That is corrected for the next time, but we're not going to update that in the report this year. And they can actually just mark that as something. It's not actually going to stop you from getting your assurance. It'll just be something that's marked. And then otherwise you have to go through that updating all the graphs, updating all the tables and everything just for that team.
100%. When you're also during this period as well, we're usually dealing with writing the annual report and doing a lot of other work outside of the data. And you're going, okay, if this is material, of course, we're going to go to the ends of the earth. But we have had instances as well where it's less than like 0.01% of something. And you have to sort of not push back, but I guess like gently communicate like, hey, we're happy for you to articulate this, but it's not material.
You've got to weigh up the resources that you're putting into making that correction and what the actual benefit of it is. Okay, so what internal stakeholders beyond your sustainability team, we've already talked about finance, of course, did you need to involve in the audit and how did you get them engaged?
Yeah. So like a lot of sustainability teams, you're working with a broad range of stakeholders across the business, but also external to the business as far as like suppliers go. But within Spark, I'm working with the engineers, asset managers, procurement, the fleet managers, investees, finance, as I said, and also like customer lead. So like there's a lot of different people, personalities, jobs that you're dealing with sort of on a day-to-day. And for us, engaging with them at the point of audit is too late. One, there are so many of them, but two, there has to be sort of that literacy uplift so that they actually understand what we're doing and what we need. And so kind of like I mentioned previously, the quarterly reviews are really critical for us, so engaging with these stakeholders and making sure that they are a part of the journey, so to speak. And also, the relationships we build with them throughout the year, it sort of helps us better understand some of those trends and outliers and how the data might evolve throughout years, throughout seasons. They're the operational experts a lot of the time. So we're able to sort of go like, is this what you would expect? And so having those discussions with them And so nothing from a trend perspective should ever come from as a surprise during audit. So it should all be very clear. Like I should know why there was a spike in quarter 3 with refrigerants, and I'll know exactly where that is and why that happened. So doing that quarterly process, I think for me is one of the easiest ways to keep the stakeholders engaged. I also think I just wanted to add, I think it's really important to recognize that they have their own day jobs, and so one part of engaging with them, making sure we have a good relationship, is also providing them with advance notice and like really clear expectations prior to that audit period. So sometimes none of them will get called on, and there's some of them, a whole lot of them will. And so just before it even kicks off, sort of letting them know that this is happening and they might be required to ask a few questions. And I think that's quite important too.
Yeah.
But yeah, that quarterly cycle for us, I think, is how we do it.
Yeah. And have you found it challenging to get buy-in from some of these people, and how have you negotiated that?
I would say for like the finance teams, it's been quite new. As we've expanded Scope 3, obviously their buy-in has had to be more so. And actually within the wider CRD process, right, like as we're starting to look at financial impact and financial risk and opportunity, we're needing to have them on side a lot more. I wouldn't say necessarily difficult, but particularly during reporting period, finance are equally as busy as us. They're going through audit as well. Trying to get that engagement during that period is quite hard. But also throughout the year, difficult might be a strong word, but it has been, like an interesting challenge for us to build up their literacy in a space that they're not necessarily acquainted with. Like we're using the spend and we're going to find the emissions associated with that. But they're sort of like, what do you mean? And you're having to sort of go right back. I would say they've probably been the most challenging. The operational teams are usually quite straightforward.
Yeah.
Because they're looking at the data. They have their own KPIs all of the time. If there's a leak, let's say, of refrigerant, they're having to communicate that across the business anyway. And so I think they're a lot more engaged and they can see why we do it and how they can benefit from it too. But yeah.
Has the mandatory reporting raised the engagement?
That's a good question. Yeah. So with finance, yes. So I think prior to that, I don't think they were really involved. Like prior to us in the spend-based Scope 3 as well. So we've been doing that for years now.
Yeah.
I think for the rest of the business, it's been like business as usual, I think. So there have been like operational teams who have been involved with the climate risk assessment process. And I think they've obviously been more engaged because they've been a part of those workshops and understanding like where things are and what the risks are. From a GHG perspective, they've always been feeling engaged. They've been very lucky. And I don't think the mandatory has changed that too much.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, so looking at the audit findings and in recommendations that you've received, what actions will you be prioritising for next year's reporting cycle?
What would we do differently? So definitely there's a need for us to strengthen documentation, and that's a key priority for us. I think we need to be clearer and more consistent with our more complex and some of those newly introduced categories. And I guess the reason being is there is that ongoing improvement, and that this, particularly within Scope 3, it's what a lot of it's all about. It's going to be next to impossible for us to get it all good first go. But I think when we're doing things for the first time, like we did with the spend-based, I think the refinement of those workbooks and the documentation and connecting the dots a little bit more, I think some of that audit feedback did refer to that, and that's something that's a real priority for us.
Yeah.
I guess to add to that as well, I think some of the feedback was probably more around more hands on deck during the audit period. And so like many sustainability teams, ours is very small. And so if I get hit by a bus, making sure that we have backup, that it's not all of the intel is sitting with me, making sure that we're better sharing the workload across other teams if we have to as well. I think there's that, making sure that the information and knowledge is there at all times, but also from a health and wellbeing perspective, avoiding that burnout and that post-audit fatigue, which is very real. And obviously the auditors don't put that in their report, like the need for having more people across it.
Yeah.
I think that's something that I've been trying to work on quite a bit in the last 6 months, just making sure that if I get hit by a bus, it'll be okay. It's going to be okay.
Or maybe if you win the lottery and don't come into work the next day.
Yeah, it'll be fine.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because it was something that popped into my head as we've been speaking, was around the resilience of the people that are going through the audit, because it is very demanding, and especially when you have to keep going back and going through things that you've been through or updating reports, and it just really sort of fatigues you. So it's good to mention.
You start out so fresh, and then
by the end of it, you're like, help.
I think it's really critical, and it is a part of that feedback. And so they're obviously saying it for different reasons, but I think there's multiple reasons why it
needs to not be a one-man band.
Yeah, for sure.
Great. So the last question is, how did you balance the need for accuracy with the realities of imperfect data? We've already talked a bit about the scope 3. So I don't know. We might be doubling up here, but let's see if you've got any other insights here.
So the way that I sort of think about it is balancing that accuracy, that imperfect data, by being clear about what is primary data, what is estimated, and where the assumptions are being made. So within our data sets. And then next, setting out a clear plan to improve data quality. In practice, for me, this sort of means prioritizing material categories and suppliers rather than trying to solve everything at once. And I think I've referred to that before, like that materiality lens is really critical when it comes to sort of that accuracy data, and also our influence and our impact. So, if we can influence a certain data set, like probably putting more effort into that than some of the others that we can't necessarily influence as much. And again, sorry, I'm probably repeating myself a little bit, but because we're treating each quarter as like an opportunity to improve on data quality, we're constantly engaging with stakeholders and trying to refine our methodologies, and slowly but surely like replacing some of those estimates and imperfect data with higher quality data as it comes available. So, trying to have those conversations regularly. So if there is an opportunity to improve, we can, and we know that it's available to us. At the end of the day, for me, and I think for a lot of practitioners, it's not about being perfect, particularly within that scope 3. It's not about having perfect numbers. It's sort of unrealistic at this stage of where we're at. But I think it's about increasing our credibility and the robustness of our entire inventory. And so for us, it's about being transparent and about that continuous improvement over time, knowing where we need to improve and just taking sometimes very tiny steps, to improve that, and having a plan to do it as well. And some years it feels bigger than others. Sometimes you make a lot of progress. Sometimes the data just isn't there yet. But having that plan and having those ongoing discussions to make sure that we're ready for when it can happen.
I'm going to drop one on you that I didn't actually prepare you for, but I'll to answer it even. Have you got any tips for people that are going into their first scenario analysis? Because when you read the documentation that's provided, it can sound like it's a really big thing. And so, I'm just curious what your advice would be going into that.
Oh, let me think about this a bit. My advice is that it is a really big thing, and that the way that we approached it was really thinking as big as possible, which sounds insane, but you're thinking about these like hypothetical but also very possible scenarios and outcomes. And you kind of have to think outside this box and think about things that you possibly don't want to think about. And you think about in that scenario planning, think about like, how is your business responding to these hopefully non-existent futures? And it actually does take you thinking quite big and being a bit more creative with it. So when we're working with some of the consultants, they would often be like, you're being too realistic. We're so used to dealing with the numbers. We're so used to being like, we need it as accurate and robust as possible. But then in the scenario planning world, obviously it can't be like aliens are coming and it's the end of the world. But you do actually have to put yourself in a position of this in a really terrible outcome. This might not happen. But if it does, what does this look like for our business? And you have to take yourself out of reality a little bit. You're sort of having to think really big. I guess my advice, like, not like use your imagination, but like very much like it is like an exercise in thinking differently and not being stuck with it. And it's probably not the advice you're looking for, Jenny, but like I think that was one of the more interesting parts of it for us. So we did it as a sector and then obviously refined it further, but it was trying to get people to think like, hey, like if it is 50 degrees outside, how are we going to get people to go work on our cell site? What are the health and safety aspects and like all these different things? you have to think big.
Yeah.
Sorry, it's not that.
That's okay.
Probably not
There's
that-
no wrong
but
answer to this. This
Yeah,
is,
that's just like the biggest
open
thing that I
questions.
learned from it. And then from a governance perspective as well, like how do you distill that into a narrative that can engage your leadership? Probably that next step. So like our job to
Yep.
sort of like think big.
Yeah.
And the next step is like, but how do we make sure that this big thinking isn't too big? You know, like there's this like huge like jump
not too
back down.
outlandish.
Yeah. So it's a real, I think for a lot of people within our sector, I think it was quite difficult because it's been drummed into us. It has to be perfect, it has to be right, it has to be real. But this sort of takes you out of that and you're going like, policy, what could happen? What's possible? And you're like,
yeah, thinking outside of the box.
yeah.
So I know obviously your sector did do a really great sector scenario analysis, which I have looked at, but then bringing it back internal, how much external guidance did you get consultants in to help you with that, or did you run it internally yourselves? How
For the
did you go
scenario
about
planning or for the
Yeah,
report?
for the scenario analysis planning.
Outside of the sector planning, we didn't have any further consultation bringing it in-house. But what we did do is workshop it with different teams inside the business. So with like people who worked in the operations space, people who were working in obviously the leadership team and the board, I think procurement, like all of the different areas that it might touch within the business, we workshop with that. We workshopped that and made sure that it not ring true again probably isn't the right word, but they could see the impact and that the response or whatever we were articulating made sense. So no external resource internally. We did have lawyers reading over everything. The scenarios, though, we were kind of outside of that remit. They do probably have a disclosure at the beginning. I'm trying to remember what we landed on, but like letting everyone know who's reading it that these aren't necessarily hard and fast facts and all the rest of it. But as far as anything else, they didn't look at necessarily the scenarios. It was more so how we communicated the rest.
Yeah. It's a strategic tool, so it's just a way of taking different lenses and looking at how your business would cope with those different scenarios. So I think it's quite an exciting process to go through, and companies shouldn't be overwhelmed because you can also run it. You don't have to pay large sums of money to loads of different consultants to come in and experts to come and guide it. You can actually do it using the guidance that's already available out there for the IPCC and in GFS and so on to inform that and use it as a tool.
Agreed. Like I think you read about a lot of people spending lots and lots of money on it, and at the end of the day it is so specific to your business strategy and like what you're doing. I think who better than your people to sort of feed into what that might look like, and just having a really good comms person to polish it up. Like, and I think there's probably going to be like iterations of it, but I don't think we at start would divert from that process. I don't think we'd ever bring someone in for that internal process.
For sure.
Yeah.
I mean, you might change your mind on that at some point, but it's not a requirement.
Yeah. No. Yeah.
Okay.
Cool.
Great.